Good morning, everybody. My name is William Burg. I'm president of the Board of Directors of Preservation Sacramento. I'd like to welcome you all to the Preservation Roundtable. The Roundtable was started in 2003 as an intergroup gathering that would happen quarterly between different historic preservation, local history organizations, local government, and developers and builders who specialize in historic properties. And as of 2015, when Sacramento Old City Association renamed itself Preservation Sacramento, we made the Preservation Roundtable our official membership meeting, as well as retaining that intergroup presentation function. And of course, since 2020, we've had all our meetings on Zoom. We still are planning on returning to in-person meetings at some point, but there are some advantages to having a Zoom presentation, that such as having a presenter who will be uh, calling in and giving presentation from a very distant place, or relatively distant elsewhere in California. And first, I'd like to ask Don, I'll have you unmute and turn your camera on to join us. Don Cox is a videographer and photographer and historian who has prepared a video for this year's historic home tour, which is coming up on September 18th. The agenda you can see here. And this year's historic home tour will include, we're back to in-person. We will have 3 in-person homes, 2 of which are historic homes that have been rehabbed, and 1 is actually an accessory dwelling unit behind a historic home that was on our 2012 tour. So it'll be tour of the garden and the new ADU. We will also have 3 online video tours, similar to last year, but unlike last year, instead of having particular show times when you'll have to tune in, if you buy a ticket, the videos are on demand. We'll have them up on our website until the end of the next month, so you can view them, pause or stop them, go back and watch them again. Then there are 3 different houses, and those ones, the nice thing about having a video tour is that these video tours are throughout the city. There's one house that's in the Wind Park Historic District, one that's in Curtis Park, and one that's in Land Park, in addition to the 3 homes that are all located within the neighborhood of Poverty Ridge Historic District. Don, are you there? I'd have you turn on your camera so you can join us and introduce the video that we're about to see.
I can't, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you fine.
I can't start my video because you stopped it.
Oh, okay. I'll try to start it again. Okay. Okay, I see your camera icon. There you are. All right. So tell us about
the
video.
As Vito Fargo house and the video that we've done on that. And we really kind of had it's an exquisitely done craftsman house out in South Natomas. And but we only had access really to 4 rooms, living room, dining room, kitchen, bathroom, and that was it. And so, you know, it was kind of a short tour, but the house had a very interesting history. So we expanded on that. And then also you had a very, very interesting people living there, with Heather Fargo and her husband, Alan. And Alan is a master builder, and he did all the work in the house, which is just incredibly well done. And then there was Heather, who, you know, spent 11 years on the city council and another 8 as mayor. And so we did at least a half-hour interview with each of them. And what we're showing here is kind of a little flavor of those interviews, a couple of outtakes from those interviews, and we have them incorporated pieces of them in the story of the house, and then we will have the full interviews available as well as separate pieces. if anyone wants to really look at them. So go ahead, Bill.
All right, let me try this, and let me know if you don't immediately see the video.
Am I playing this or are you?
Okay, is it not? Is it not playing?
No.
Okay, hold on. I'm sorry.
And we're able to purchase it. So
Okay.
it ended up being great.
All right. Well, I just so that's what we get for not testing that particular aspect. So Don, actually, if you can share your screen to show the video, we'll let you go ahead and launch it.
I can't do that. I don't have it on my
All
laptop.
right. Okay. Let me see what we can do here. Well, this is embarrassing. Technical issues sometimes happen with the preservation roundtable. We finally figured out how to have video that would work, but not necessarily. And then we've done video in our past Zoom events, but we appear to be having some difficulty with actually showing the video. And so I'm going to try one other thing and see if we can get a different video to work. Our historic home tour sizzle reel, and see if we can get that to work. And if not, then we'll just kind of have to talk about it. We have been known to wing the video. Okay. Oh, here, let me try this. Oh, it says it's an unsupported file format. So I'm really sorry, everybody. We will post. We'll try to post the video on YouTube or on our social media and send out a link afterwards. But suffice to say that the roundtable is live and we're operating without a net. So maybe we could just talk about so the Fargo Excavator House. Maybe just very briefly tell us where it is and what it is. And
yeah, it's a craftsman house in the South Natomas district. And it was built around 1917, 1918. And it's has rather interesting historical connections with Portuguese and Japanese communities in rural Sacramento County. And its current owners, like I said earlier, are Heather Fargo and her husband, Alan Mall. And he's a master builder. And he really finished the house. And then it has a tank house attached to it. You know, the old water tank house. And he has restored the tank house. And restored the windmill. And so it's rather an interesting piece of property, and it's really interesting to hear them talk about it.
okay, well, like I said, we'll try to post that video at a later date and share it on our social media. So thank you, and back to the. I'll have you go ahead and shut off your camera, Don. But the historic home tour like I said, September 18th. Tickets are on sale now, and I've been asked to share that we are still seeking volunteers. Specifically, we're seeking volunteers to help with the street fair. But essentially, what we need is a couple people willing to stand or sit for 2 hours in an orange vest, which can be under shade, at the edges of our street fair, just to ensure that things are safe. And it doesn't require any special skills other than the ability to stand or sit for 2 hours with an orange vest. And in return, you will receive a free ticket to take the rest of the home tour, both the in-person tours and the virtual tours. And our volunteer coordinator may have other needs for volunteers to work in the houses, but I think we're having pretty good results, and we really appreciate the folks who have contacted us to volunteer. But we do need a couple more specifically for the street fair. Our next speaker is Carson Anderson. Until recently, City of Sacramento's preservation director, and he's come back to volunteer with the city to help out with a special project, which is, I think, the main thing you'll be talking about today. So, Carson, I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Bill. So I'm going to talk today about the African American Experience History Project. Most of you will probably know that the city pursued a grant from the National Trust from its African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. That's quite a mouthful there. I think we were among 200 applicants for the grant, and we were successful and received $50,000. We had asked for more money, considering the scope of this endeavor, but we were, alas, given $50,000. We're endeavoring to make that money go as far as we can. One of the strategic decisions in organizing this project was to establish a group of community partner relationships. One of those partners is Sacramento State's Public History Program, and they have really helped us a great deal. They've done, the students in the Public History Program have recorded at this juncture 10 oral histories of really important elders in the Black community, including people like Ginger Rutland, who was one of the first journalists, Black women journalists working in media here in both Northern California and specifically in Sacramento, and other prominent individuals. As a history term project, the students produced thematic papers talking about various facets of Black history here in Sacramento and in Northern California. So we have both the oral histories that were gathered by the students and transcriptions of those interviews, and we have these term papers. And then as a further component, as a further contribution to the project, the spring of 2023 class will go out and they will do documentation of at least 10 properties with strong African American historical associations with them as part of the cultural resources management class that will happen at the beginning of next year. So kudos to the university for their help with this project. We had a very exciting and productive kickoff meeting with our community partners back in June at Valley Vision. Had a decent turnout. I think there were about 35 people from all of the different partnering organizations sharing their thoughts about how we should think about approaching this project. One of the really big takeaways is that we really need to focus on the ingathering of oral histories. So we have taken that to heart. We have recorded a video and uploaded it to the city's website. It has a absolutely wonderful kind of introduction to why oral histories are so important, why the Black community should embrace this endeavor, recorded by retired Police Chief Daniel Hahn. And then we have an instructional video on the city's web pages about how members of the family, or let's say we have an elder who's part of a church community, how one of the young people in the church can go about recording a oral history of their elder and uploading it to the city's web pages. So that component is moving along quite well. We have had a lot of phone contact by elders in the community and other interested people from churches who would like to record oral histories or have people that they know record oral histories. We have a group of early Black police officers who are now in the process of recording oral histories of the early membership in the Black Police Officers Association, which got established in the late 1970s. So there seems to be a bit of buzz about the project, which is wonderful. We also have had a lot of media interest. So there have been multiple TV interviews with city staff, with myself and with Sean, that have aired. A delightful interview by Vicky Gonzalez, who is the host of Insight on Capitol Public Radio, did a 15-minute interview with Sean DeCourcy. I think that aired about a week ago. So a lot of attention. People are starting to call us and are inquiring via email about this project and how they can be part of it, which is very gratifying. A couple other things to share. We thought it was important as a matter of social justice, social and economic equity, to offer stipends to some of our heavily engaged or involved subject matter experts, as well as people who take on a role of being community ambassadors who spend numbers of hours helping us arrange meetings, arranging contacts with key individuals in the community. Given the discussions that are going to be part of our historic context statement about systemic racism and segregation and the role that shaped in diminishing Black wealth and in diminishing opportunity within Sacramento's Black community, we thought it was important to be able to offer stipends. Preservation Sacramento, yay, Preservation Sacramento stepped up and are providing some of the funding for this effort. That funding is being matched, I'm happy to report, by the National Trust, which through a different grant program has coughed up an additional $5,000 to support us in making these stipends available to our supporters. We're going to have a series of public meetings. We had our first meeting last week, I should say on the 4th of August. That meeting was informative because it let us know how we need to improve our outreach to the Black community. We learned that some of our elders, unless they know who's contacting them, don't respond to emails. And we relied very heavily upon using email to reach out to people. And we learned that people were not responding. And at the meeting that we had a week or so ago, we learned why that is the case. So we'll be working through our public outreach officer, Lynette Hall, and other people who are known in the community to make outreach to people who have not contacted us thus far. So important lesson learned. I should mention the outline for the historic context statement has been prepared by our historic consultant, Paige and Turnbull. Staff is now looking at that outline. It will go to the ad hoc subcommittee for its input as well before we hand it back to our consultant. let me quickly mention that this ad hoc committee will be comprised of a couple members from the city's Preservation Community Commission, as well as a few additional members from the community at large, including Clarence Caesar, who I'm sure some of you know, who is a retired state park department historian, who is a subject matter expert on the history of African Americans here in Sacramento. He's graciously consented to be part of the subcommittee, along with Eugene Willis, who is, I think it was an applicant for the Preservation Commission, and will be supporting the efforts of our project as a member of this subcommittee. I think those are the key points that I wanted to share with you. So I'll turn things back to Bill. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Carson. Thank you so much. And as Carson mentioned, Preservation Sacramento is contributing a match to this project, and that's part of what we hope to do as an organization. There's places where we're not a large organization. We don't have staff. We volunteer run, and we base our operations essentially on contributions. But we can leverage. So do things like buying sandwiches for public meetings or providing matching funds, things that the city can't do or would have more difficulty doing. A nonprofit like us can act a little more nimbly, and so that's one of the things that we've really discovered is that's just in the current role. We still do a lot of the things we have been doing as far as our advocacy and providing nominations, but that kind of leverage, it helps us reach new communities and people who don't necessarily think of themselves as preservationists, or the preservation of a community works in a different way for different communities, and that's a learning curve for the city, for us as an organization, and for the preservation community as a whole. But it's a really exciting journey. And I was at the meeting that Carson mentioned last week, just there to serve sandwiches, but that was an education in itself. Just essentially the city told those assembled and that they're here to listen and to hear, and because we all have a lot of exciting things to learn. So thank you, Carson. I'll have you shut off your camera, and I'm going to try this video one more time because I think we might actually be able to get it to work. So stand by, everyone, and let me know if you don't see the video in the next few seconds. It looks like we were actually able to watch that video, so we'll try the next video.
And I had mentioned to him several times, if you ever want to sell, let me know. I'd be interested. I don't know if I could pull it off, but I'd be interested. So he called me, but it happened to be in July while I was running for mayor. And it was a little busy time for me, and it was like, oh my God. I said, well, yes, I'm definitely interested. And I thought, okay, I better talk to Alan, and we better think about how we might do this. And the next day I drove by, and there was a for sale sign going up. And I knew that I had to jump on it that day. So the realtor that I wanted to call wasn't in town, so I called another realtor here from South Potomac, and lined him up, and we put in an offer either that day or the next day, and we were able to negotiate with Paul, and were able to purchase it. So it ended up being great. I didn't move in until after the race was over and after I was sworn in. I didn't move in until January, but we were able to purchase it, and gratefully so. It's been a great place to live for the last 20 years.
Yeah, it looks great.
Well, thank you. Alan has been very good he's very good at what he does.
Yes.
He pays attention to detail. Did a lot of research on what craftsman homes should look like, And this was a pretty simple place. I mean, it was a farmhouse. It wasn't, one of the nice Victorians downtown. This was a Craftsman, and and it was pretty simple. And I'm not sure if this is one of our cats.
Hello.
I did ask Paul when I went to buy the house, how many cats does the house come with? And he said, well, I think about 12.
Oh, boy.
And I never really was quite sure. There were quite a few cats living under the house when we moved in. And there are still a number of cats that live here. It's a good house for cats. But yeah, it's been busy time to get things fixed up in here. We're not quite done. We probably never will be. As anyone knows who has an historic home, look at your audience.
Of course, all this is actually done out of plywood. They make very thin veneers now, but it made it a lot more affordable to buy plywood with veneers and then piece it together to make it look like it was solid oak. So that way I got a whole lot of select wood without buying a fortune worth of lumber.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. It was something like 32 sheets of plywood to do these 2 rooms.
Wow.
It was a lot of milling.
Yeah.
And we initially did a sizing, and then we did finish milling as we put it together. And there was one of the before pictures that showed all the lumber stacked against one wall after it had been sized. And then it was actually staying in place. So after piecing together, we actually came here and stained everything and did some finished caulking and painted the ceilings and stuff. So a lot of hours.
Oh, yeah. It shows.
Yeah.
And I had mentioned to
All right. And so sorry, I apologize again for the slight shift in program, but we were able to get that video working just to show people a little sneak peek of what's planned for the video tours, and also because in 2021 we showed a very short video about the Azevedo Fargo house with the promise of a larger one. So if you bought a ticket for last year's home tour, you will be getting an email in the next week or so letting you know how to watch the video. And as like the 2022 video tours, it will be on demand. You can just check it out whenever you want, stop it, watch it multiple times, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. And now our next presentation for the next 10 minutes, I wanted to update people about the Richmond Grove Historic District Survey. This is the main project we've been working on for the past year or two. Essentially, the other thing we've been spending our money on, mostly revenue from the past few years of home tours, which was a historic district survey of Richmond Grove. Sacramento has around 30 historic districts. Here's a map of them, and you can see they're concentrated in and around the central city, with a few outside the central city, like Oak Park and the Old City Cemetery, and a portion of Sacramento City College. But there are a few places where there are gaps, and in many cases they're because they were areas that were redeveloped, and the buildings that were there weren't really considered old enough to be historic buildings, like Capitol Mall and the area around the arena and other redevelopment zones, or along state corridors. And in some cases, there were issues with there's only a certain amount of money, a certain amount of political capital. In some cases, the buildings sometimes just weren't old enough yet. And you can see that in the bottom of the central city, there are 2 large historic districts. Well, there's on the lower left is Southside Park Historic District, which really extends along T Street all the way to about 15th. You can see there's sort of a tail, and then on the other side, to the east of the central city, there's Poverty Ridge, the neighborhood that'll be on our home tour, and Newton Booth. But in the middle, there's an area that is not a historic district, but people who look at this area today really wouldn't see the houses as being any different. And so our effort was to essentially add to the existing Southside Park Historic District, which you can see here in yellow, and the survey area that we covered was the area that is surrounded by the red line that you see here. And it extends to 19th Street north to S Street, south to Highway 50, and then on the west it extends all the way out to 10th Street to capture some mid-century modern buildings, since they would date from the 1950s. And when Sacramento was first looking at creating its historic districts in conjunction with our predecessor organization, Sacramento Old City Association's advocacy, these buildings were only about 20, 30 years old, not really old enough to be considered historic buildings. But now almost half a century has gone by. And so we wanted to take another look at the importance of what happened in this neighborhood in the 1950s and 60s as a consequence of redevelopment, the communities that came here that were already here but weren't really recognized in earlier generations' historic district surveys. The name Richmond Grove comes from a picnic grounds that was originally located between 19th and 20th Street and between P and R Street. It was at the end of the old horse-drawn streetcar line, which its farthest extent to the north to the southeast was 20th and P. And here you can see an advertisement from 1870 for cars leaving the foot at K Street every half hour, 25-cent fare for a round trip to Richmond Grove Grand Picnic. And that grove, it was wiped out around the turn of the century by Western Pacific Railroad when it came through the neighborhood. But it is now the name that the city used for what for a long time was really just the eastern part of Southside. And this aerial image that you can see from the 1890s with Southside in the foreground, you can see the old city cemetery in the lower right, and in the backgrounds, this was around 1900 or the 1890s to 1900 when there was still a levee on R Street, and so the area south of R Street was still very often subject to flooding. That changed after 1900 when a new levee was built on Y Street, which caused a land rush and a spurt of new development into this neighborhood following the streetcar line. That ran along T Street, started operation around 1907, and it came down 7th Street, turned east on T, and went all the way to 28th Street, where it joined another line that went to Oak Park. And it was supposed to continue down T Street all the way to Elmhurst. It never happened, but that's another story. But as you can see, having streetcar lines along these areas made them into popular destinations for homes because they were easily accessible to downtown. And where streetcar lines crossed, those were very often new hubs for business because you got lots of passenger traffic, lots of pedestrian traffic, and the highest land values were where streetcar lines crossed. Individual portions of the neighborhood were developed as subdivisions, just as they are today. Mission Traco is one such example in the southeastern corner of Richmond Grove, much of which is now actually wiped out by Highway 50. You can see it ran from V Street to the Y Street levee, and the middle of it was destroyed for the highways. But some elements of the northern end of Mission Traco and the southern end on X Street still exist. There are several different architectural styles which are common. The late 19th century style of Queen Anne was very popular. These are the houses that look like they're basically look like a wedding cake with lots of gingerbread and frilly flourishes, popular the late 19th century lace doily architectural effect. But in tall, narrow row houses, often as the building on the left, you can see there are apartments downstairs and a main house upstairs. And so these are not necessarily single family homes. In fact, the vast majority of the buildings in this neighborhood are not single-family homes. Folk Victorian is another style common to the late 19th century. It's not really a style in particular, but just a general category for houses that were architecturally simple, but followed the basic Victorian theme, similar sort of styles and forms of houses, but with a little less gingerbread, more of an economical approach or just a simple approach. The early 20th century brought the Foursquare, which basically looks like a two-story box which can have different sorts of details on it. And then the one-story variant called the half square or the neoclassic row house. This was a very popular style in Sacramento, raised off the ground so it gives a little bit of elevation, a little bit of ventilation, and a little bit of prominence for a house that's generally very close to the sidewalk. So it gives a sense of privacy and monumentality, but is still economical and compact. And these are also seen all over. And awesome, as you can see by the two mailboxes here, very popular to convert to duplexes. The Craftsman Bungalow is another early 20th century style, getting away from the frilly detail of the 19th century. It's very simple, robust details with the rafter tails that are exposed under the eaves of the house, sometimes projecting out from under the eaves of the house, as you can see in the example on the left, with the triangular brackets supporting the roof. They're really decorative, but the idea is to look like a simple craftsperson's house, using local material and different types of siding, very often brick or even river rock supporting the porch. Then the Tudor revival, and there are more dramatic examples of Tudor revival in neighborhoods of greater wealth. If any of you have seen the houses that we've been talking about on Montgomery Way the past couple of years, another potential historic district, those are really more the grand Tudors that are much more inspired by medieval European or the British antecedents. But Tudor revival in Richmond Grove, a more working class neighborhood, tended to be simple, stucco homes using some elements of Tudor architecture and sometimes with tile roof, and but just little bits of architectural flair, like the picture window on the house on the right, to give it a little vibe that set it with the revival styles of the early 20th century. Minimal traditional was inspired by the Works Progress Administration and actually by the Federal Housing Administration's minimum size requirements for homes that would get FHA loans. They said you have to be this many square feet. And so, lo and behold, in the 1930s and 1940s, there was a whole flurry of little houses that are that many square feet. And the group on the left is actually not not two single homes, but part of what's called a bungalow court. So not just two houses, but a whole cluster of houses on a single lot. What's very often in today's parlance called missing middle housing, which is housing that is smaller than a large apartment building, but more units than a single family home. But because of the design, the scale, and the form of the buildings, they fit well in a single family neighborhood. And so the idea is that this neighborhood looks like a single family neighborhood to many people, but it is about 90% multifamily, but it's built to that family size scale. Streamlined modern is another style that's found in the district. It's most commonly associated with commercial buildings like the cigar store on 16th Street that you see on the left, but it's also associated with residential. And one of the most prominent homes, one of the best known, is the streamlined modern house on the right, Percy Lee family house, still in the same family, but built for a prominent member of Sacramento's Chinese American community. In mid-century modern, uh, which became much more popular in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, which also found it in commercial as well as residential forms. Not every building from the mid-century is a mid-century modern design, but they are all of this type of form, and some of them are contributors to the historic district. And here you can see that the neighborhood had freeways going through. Actually, Highway 99 ran up and down 15th and 16th Streets, and so you got a lot of traffic on those streets. And then the major impact on this neighborhood was, of course, Highway 50, which literally an impact. It tore out a whole row of blocks in the same way that Interstate 5 did downtown, and creates a firm boundary for the southern edge of the district, as well as cutting off the X Street area. We'd originally considered including X Street in the survey, but we decided that it really wasn't justifiable because there's this huge block in the way. Also, this is a mixed-use neighborhood. Another kind of older idea of historic preservation is the idea that there are commercial intrusions or industrial intrusions on a neighborhood. But this is a neighborhood that had industrial uses from its very beginning. This is the automobile construction bodywork factory at 13th and U Street, and then an industrial building in an alley off of 19th and V, which was probably used as barrel making or beer storage for the Buffalo Brewery. Office uses, another thing that happened in the mid-century was new office construction in this neighborhood, all throughout the neighborhood. This is what we'd call a mixed-use neighborhood in today's parlance. Back then, it was just the way that neighborhoods were built. Multifamily residential apartment buildings like the Monroe along 16th Street. And one thing I'd like to point out about the building on the right, this building is actually in Richmond Grove now, adjacent to the William Land School, but it was originally closer to about 6th and O Street, and it was moved there because it was a brand new apartment building considered too valuable to simply demolish along with the rest of the West End and Japantown. So these styles of buildings are part of what we wanted to capture. And then I mentioned 10th Street. That was essentially in many ways the new Japantown that replaced the earlier Japantown demolished by redevelopment along Capitol Avenue, including many of the businesses. The center building is Wakano Ura Chop Suey, which is located downtown off of 4th Street. But they kept the sign when Wakano Ura Chop Suey moved to 10th Street. And then many of you have gotten snow cones or mochi at Osaka Ya, and that is a very important building. It's architecturally, it's very plain. It's basically a cinder block rectangle, but culturally, into the history and the community, extremely important place. And other places that you ordinarily wouldn't expect, like these uses along 16th Street. When 16th became a freeway, many of the residential homes said, well, this is a great place to put a business, so we're going to build an extension onto the exterior. Maybe call it an accessory commercial unit instead of an accessory dwelling unit. And then below, you can see that there are different type of architectural styles for businesses, often supported by very often Chinese families, Japanese families, Korean. The Taekwondo Academy on 16th Street, Kang's. There's many will know that there is a ceremonial alley named after Master Kang, who is a very, very well-established figure internationally in Taekwondo history. This was his academy. Commercial uses along S Street, including this corner store. I believe it was originally an Italian American owned corner store that's now a sushi restaurant. And then one building that's already listed as a Sacramento Register landmark, the Nathaniel Cawley Law Offices, which was designed. Nathaniel Cawley, well-known African American civil rights attorney, and designed by Sacramento's first African American architect. So some changes happened in the neighborhood in the 1970s. You can see that there's some buildings that still exist. Earhart's Cafe is now where Scorpio Coffee is, who was earlier restaurant very closely associated with Sacramento's emerging LGBT community in the 1970s. And the New Society Bookstore, you can see a Central America Action Committee. Start looking at some of the changes happening culturally and socially in the 1970s. But 1970 is the end of the period of significance because of essentially the shift in cultural changes and the changes that came with freeway construction. Some of the buildings are going to be nominated individually to the National Register as well as the Sacramento Register as landmark, like the Percy Lee House. And the Women's Civic Improvement Club. This was an African American women's social club which also had a residential function. They bought an old house for a German family that had 10 kids built this house, and they bought it because it was a perfect place for a boarding house for single African American women who otherwise had great difficulty finding decent and safe housing in Sacramento. The Koyasan Temple was originally an Italian apostolic church, converted architecturally more recently to suit its purpose as a Buddhist temple. But the significance of this building, is also being nominated as a landmark, is its social function, its function to the community and representation of the Asian American Pacific Islander history of the neighborhood and how it changed. There are some other houses that are being nominated individually for their architecture, the architectural style. This is kind of one of the interesting ones. Edward S. Moore was an African American pianist and organist who moved to the neighborhood in 1912 and when this house was first built. And he used to perform as part of the band that would play during silent movies at the Empress Theater, now the Crest Theater downtown. And the architect's office at 2203 13th Street. Contributors and non-contributors. Not every building is going to be protected by this. The idea is that buildings that were built during the period of significance and still retain their historic integrity are contributors. So those are the ones that would be protected. Buildings that were built after the period of significance, such as the AMPM, would not be protected. There are some limitations. Design review applies to any building in Sacramento, whether it was built in 1919 or 2019. But in a historic district, the design review is done by preservation staff who know about the incentives available. Generally, you can't demolish a historic building, such as a contributor to a historic district or a landmark. Window replacement generally is prohibited, but there are a lot of ways to get great energy efficiency while keeping historic wood windows. Exterior changes require a permit done through City Hall, but you can do infill. You can build on the back. You can build new units in the basement for elevated buildings. And there are incentives, historic building code alternatives, so you don't have to follow all modern building codes. This can save a lot of money when doing a home rehab. For new property owners, it's the Mills Act property tax contract is probably the best deal. It allows you to save about a third off of your property taxes if you're rehabbing a historic house and enter into a 10-year voluntary contract with the city that you will either rehab the building if it's in rough shape or you will maintain it if it's already in good shape. There's a California Historic Rehab Tax Credit for buildings that are listed in the National Register or California Register. There's a Historic Places Grant Program through the city, which is currently basically out of money, but one of the things we're working on as Preservation of Sacramento is how can we fund the Historic Places Grant Program, which will provide matching funds for people who want to restore historic properties, or just provide funds without the need for a match for low-income households that want to restore their properties. And the most important thing is reduced ambiguity about what's historic and what's not. Right now, when you want to demolish a building that's over 50 years old, you have to pay a consultant to evaluate the building and go through a whole process. Because we've done this survey, we know which ones are historic, which ones are not. That ambiguity is reduced greatly for any project. And one of the biggest variables in any new development project is ambiguity and knowing what's there. So this makes it simpler. What it doesn't mean doesn't limit your paint colors. If you live in a historic district, you can paint your house any color you want. The only caveat is generally don't paint your brick or your tile, or if you have a historic mural, and if you have a historic mural, it's pretty obvious if it is, then you're not supposed to paint that. But other than that, you can paint your house any color you want. You can have any kind of landscaping you want. You can xeriscape. You can have any kind of exterior fixtures that you want. You can have solar panels. You can add ADUs. Those are both state laws. You can't be told, no, you can't have those just because you have a historic house. You can have duplexes and apartments. We're going to talk more about zoning in a minute. Property values really don't change too much with a historic district. And most of all, listing as a historic district does not stop growth, change, or new development. Generally, it attracts all three while protecting the historic places. What that means is you can have your historic neighborhood and grow it too. Zoning. There's a lot of talk recently about a state law called SB 9, which is intended to allow duplexes in single-family zone properties. And currently, the way the law is written, that excludes historic districts if they don't allow duplexes already. If you can see by this zoning chart, most of the neighborhood is zoned either R3A or R1B. R1B is single family zoning in the central city, which allows duplexes by right everywhere. So duplexes are already allowed. SB 9 does not apply to this neighborhood, and in fact, most of the neighborhood is R3A, which allows fourplexes by right. And if you buy a single family house that's a historic house, that means you can convert it to a duplex or a fourplex by right, in addition to adding ADUs to the back. There's also C1 and C2, the pink areas here. These are commercial properties which can actually have even more intensive uses, whether or not they're contributors. This is the overall outline, like I said, and we're submitting this to the city. We're still adding a couple corrections. We've gotten some great feedback. We did a public event at Urban Roots Brewing a couple weeks ago, and we're hoping to do one more later in the summer after we've submitted it to the city, and that we were able to provide some corrections to what the consultant wrote. Okay, and I think we're just, I don't know if we're in time or overtime, but actually, Karen, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. We're running about 10 minutes late, so Karen, I'll have you turn on your camera and give us an update about the state capitol annex project.
Good morning, everyone. As most of you already know, the Capitol Annex project would result in massive changes to our historic Capitol and Capitol Park, which are on the National Register. It includes the demolition of the historic annex building, its replacement with a much larger, predominantly glass building, the creation of a new underground parking garage running essentially underneath where 12th Street is, between L and N, with changes to the streetscape and loss of the historic palms in order to create entrances to that parking lot. It also calls for a visitor center, which would be entered, well, it would result in the obliteration of the historic West Plaza, where so many demonstrations, celebrations, activities have occurred, and major changes to the that essentially seriously affect the front primary facade of the original 1860s Capitol. So 4 lawsuits were filed to stop that project and get it reviewed and try to get an alternative that would preserve and rehab the historic annex, preserve and respect the park and its trees, many of which have now already been lost, and get a completely new look at how to do a visitor center that would not eliminate the West Plaza and massively deface the primary entrance to our original Capitol. There have been 4 lawsuits filed. 2 of them were over the EIR itself. One of them was over what was called a prior commitment, which basically called out the fact that there was zero analysis done of how to maintain the historic annex. It was just assumed that it would be demolished with no analysis at all, and then moved on to we'll build this new thing in its place. And then there was also a lawsuit filed because historic resources in California, like our state capitol, require review by the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Officer, and that did not happen. The 2, excuse me, EIRs we were lost at the Superior Court level. The Save Our Capitol, which filed one of them, has already filed an appeal, which the other EIR suit, which was filed by Save the Capitol, Save the Trees, will be joining. The pre-commitment suit was originally thrown out on a technicality, saying, well, you didn't file this in time. And we didn't, it wasn't filed in time because we could not get the data that we needed to file it until after the deadline. So that that has been appealed. No dates have yet been set for the hearing of those appeals. The 4th suit, the failure to consult the SHPO, was excuse me, was heard in Superior Court. Judge Kruger was the judge. As you probably know, when a case is heard, there's an initially a preliminary opinion that is issued. That preliminary opinion said that indeed an error had been made and that SHPO had to have been consulted. However, that got derailed. The Annex project is a project of the Joint Rules Committee led by Ken Cooley, who has been utterly determined to do this project as proposed by Joint Rules. And so what he did to make sure that if we got a ruling in favor, that it could be gotten around, was to file a spot bill. And he's actually filed more than one of those. But in this case, the spot bill was SB 189. And a spot bill can be have its detail filled in at the last minute. And so this spot bill at the last minute said, basically rewrote the legislation that had governed the annex project and said, oh, by the way, this project does not require any consultation with SHPO. That led Judge Kruger to have to say that, to rule against our lawsuit. He actually described our lawsuit as having been gutted like a fish by this SB 189. It was approved for people who follow the legislative process. There's a huge rush of putting bills through at the last minute. So SB 89 was passed by the state Senate and the Assembly, and the governor signed it immediately. And what that has done is not only deprive the annex project of a protection that the SHPO review that historic buildings have had of this caliber and significance have had for years, but it also has the potential to affect preservation statewide, because theoretically the legislature could look at another building that the state owns and say, oh, we don't want to have to review this historically, so we're going to go do the same kind of thing. We're going to use this this precedent. So it's hugely problematic, and California Preservation Foundation has put out an email about the potential implications of it, with recommendations of contacting the governor and officials at the legislature. And those of you who are on Preservation Sacramento's email list will be getting a copy of that. And we urge you to take action. What happened is really a bad thing. And as to conclude my presentation, I want to just read a couple of lines from what Brown Rudnick, which was the law firm that represented Save Our Capital on the SHPO lawsuit, what their lawyers had to say about it. Like the rest of us, their lawyers were appalled. And what they wrote was, we filed a lawsuit challenging the legislature and DGS, because DGS was carrying out the actions of joint rules, and DGS's failure to follow the law regarding consultation with the Office of Historic Preservation, i.e. the SHPO, before destroying the historic Capitol Annex and portions of Capitol Park. Rather than acknowledging and correcting this unlawful action, the legislature, with the assistance of Governor Newsom, simply changed the law to once again exempt itself from legal protections intended to protect and preserve our most important historic resources. And the fact that they did it after the fact essentially, cut the public out of its previous legal right to sue on something like this. And their concluding sentence in their statement was, by taking this extraordinary action, the legislature prevented the public from discovering the truth about the Capitol Annex project. The truth being that it had every right to be reviewed and that the public had a right to see that review. So that's where we stand right now. The push is to try to get this out to as many people as possible in the court of public opinion, because this is a real assault on preservation, and it's also an assault on people's legitimate right to sue based on existing law at the time that they file the lawsuit. So that's where we stand, and thank you very much for this opportunity to do this update and look for the CPF.
Okay, thank you, Karen. And there was a question from John Marshak that is SHPO consultation also required by federal law, but my understanding is that it's required if there's federal hook, if there's a federal agency involved, and I think this is strictly a state project. But that's a very good question.
I think that's true. Yeah, Brown and Rudnick said that given what the legislature had done, there was absolutely no point in them filing an appeal, and they did not want to take SOC's money to file in an impossible situation.
Okay, thank you, Karen. We're gonna shift over to Kim Anderson, AIA Central Valley, and Kim, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. Thanks for the opportunity to tell a little bit about experience architecture. So I'm the executive director of AIA Central Valley, and this year we're holding our 11th annual experience architecture event in the fall. So we do a insert each year in Comstock's magazine, and this is the cover art for this year's guide. Our focus this year is the why behind design, and so that is here for you to see. For some reason, we're not advancing. Oops, there we go. Here's our mission statement. Now in our 11th year, AIA Central Valley Experience Architecture is an annual public outreach event dedicated to facilitating greater transparency with the public and how architects create our built environment, how architecture impacts their daily lives, and to highlight our region's unique architectural identity. So this is the lineup of events. The events run from October 7th through the 16th. This is still a draft. We're still pulling it together. The event's not until October, but we do have our magazine deadline coming up. You can kind of glance there. This calendar will be on our website, and then of course we'll be marketing all the individual events. I did want to do a call out on Sunday, the 9th of October. Bill will be leading a walking tour. It's called Solar Punk Walking Tour, and we're thrilled to have him do that. His walking tours have always been very well received. Some other highlights, our keynote presentation will be design narratives featuring Johnson Schmaling architects. They're doing quite a bit of work here in Sacramento. Some of you have seen Flex House. There's several other projects. So they're going to talk about their why. We're really looking forward to that. It will be at Sacramento State University on Friday the 7th. Another highlight I think this group might enjoy is Wednesday, October 12th. We're doing a presentation called Coming to a Store Near You, Repurposing Aging Commercial Corridors for Workforce Housing, excuse me. We are tentatively partnering with Civic Well on this presentation. They had just recently done one in July, so we're going to kind of take it next level and talk about why not here in the Sacramento region. We're doing an open house evening with several of our firms. We've had a number of firms move to the Midtown area, so they'll be opening their doors for a couple of hours. And then we're really excited about expanding our Kids Draw program on Saturday, October 15th. It's called Hands-On Architecture, Learn, Build, Sketch, and Color. We have a new program called Architecture by the Book, and it essentially exposes children to architects of different backgrounds and talks about how they became architects and their impact on the built environment, and then also has an activity. And we've had a number of architecture firms who do schoolwork that have led the development of those boxes. Our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee has put together a new coloring book, and it will feature projects in Sacramento and other projects outside of Sacramento designed by architects in our chapter. And the coloring book will be a PDF, so it can be downloaded from our website, but we'll also print up a set of those to use for that kids activity. And of course, we'll still have the Kids Draw portion. Our benefactor this year is River City Food Bank. We're just really amazed by the work they're doing in Sacramento for food insecurity, and we are in the process of developing a volunteer opportunity with them. So those are just some of the highlights, and I forgot to mention the bike tour, Saturday, October 8th, always popular and generally sells out. And we have a new group of young professionals actually assisting our long-term event coordinators for that, Peter Saucerman and Bob Chase, who some of you may know, who've done an amazing job, but they're working now with a new team of emerging professionals. So we're excited to see where that program goes. I just wanted to highlight a little bit more the Solar Puck walking tour that Bill's leading. We don't yet have our starting and ending locations, and I'll spare you a reading of this, but you can glance at it while it's on the screen here. This will take place from 1 to 2:30 p.m. And so I hope people from Preservation Sacramento will join in, as well as others. I always learn a ton every time I attend one of Bill's walking tours. And then we're really excited to include a full page ad. We appreciate that in your home tour guide. And so this is a draft of that ad. We're still putting some finishing touches on it, but my understanding is we have a bit more time before it's due. So highlighting some of the events that we're doing this year. And just in closing, our webpage, aiacv.org/EXPARCH, will have information on each of the events and links to our Facebook page, where we have Facebook events set up, as well as our Eventbrite registration site. All the events are low cost or free, but we do require registration for everything. So we kind of can plan for the number of people that are attending. So we do hope to see some folks from this group coming. And Bill, I wanted to share with you that I'm excited to see if we can get some volunteers to assist you with your home tour as well. So we'll be in touch.
Terrific. Thank you. All right, and then our featured speaker this evening is Victoria Kastner, who I will let her introduce herself. And Victoria, maybe just I'll let you say hello and tell us who you are, and take it away. I think a lot of people are very excited about the presentation you're giving today.
Thank you so much, Bill. I'm just so impressed by what I have witnessed for the last hour or so, and I know that it's just a small part of the work that you've all done for so many years. And Sacramento is so architecturally rich, and it really is an honor to speak to you and know the noble efforts that you're involved with. I wanted to say that I've appeared in a film about the East Annex and Alfred Eichler and the importance of the current state capitol in Capitol Park. I'm not exactly sure when that will be aired, but it's about a 10-minute film telling some of the history, and I'm just adding my voice to all of yours. So, but what I'm really here to talk about today is Julia Morgan. I was the historian at Hearst Castle for many years, more than 2 decades, and I have studied in the public history program, just like Bill, but back when it was in at UCSB. And I also got a master's in museum management from George Washington University, but I basically spent my whole career at Hearst Castle. I went on a tour and was completely, I just fell in love with it. And I was also able to author the definitive trilogy on its history that is published by Abrams Books. When I first arrived on a tour, it was in the 70s, and people said, oh, it's gaudy, it's dark, and all the kind of conventional wisdom that people felt about it in the 70s. But I really was gobsmacked. I was also told a woman built this, but we don't know anything about her. And it was a great introduction to Julia Morgan. I had grown up surrounded by Julia Morgan buildings without even knowing it, because I graduated from El Cerrito High, and I lived in the kind of El Cerrito, Kensington Hills area. And we knew a lot about architecture. We talked about architects, but I never knew her name. And so it really has been an honor to work on this biography. I left my job at the castle in 2018, knowing I'd have to retire in order to put my time into this biography. So I think there are 2 myths about Julia Morgan, and one is that she burned all her papers. And so we'll never know anything about her. And the fact is that she actually saved an incredible amount of material, most of which is at Cal Poly Special Collections in San Luis Obispo. And diaries, letters, and my research assistant, Ruth Latson, and I, in 2018, began transcribing that material. I'd worked with it for years, but they'd only recently allowed cell phones to, take pictures. And so we were able to transcribe things, and it's a work in progress. but we ended up with 800,000 words, either to or from Julia Morgan, and they're all word searchable. And I'm working with Special Collections right now. We're proofing it, and it's a big job, but it will be posted online. And I hope that that's going to allow many scholars everywhere to study this fascinating person, who I think even now, even though she won the gold medal from the AIA in 2014, I think she's still really associated primarily with Hearst Castle. The other myth about her is that she was likely a lesbian, and in all those 800,000 words, I saw no evidence of that. There's no long-term relationships, long-term roommates, long-term traveling companions, and I'm hoping to share with you today not only highlighting some of her buildings in the Sacramento region, of which there are many, but also really talk about her private life. And when you see what she did, caring for her family and all the things she was working on, her romance was with architecture, and it wasn't that uncommon for career women in the first third of the century, if they were career women, not to marry or even get involved in any major emotional relationships. She was warm and generous and not the least bit reclusive, but her passion was architecture. And I was fortunate to work with a visual artist on the book that just came out in March. It's called Julia Morgan, An Intimate Biography of the Trailblazing Architect, published by Chronicle Books. And his name is Alex Verdikoff, and he's a brilliant visual artist. And since, we felt that we had to really show her work, and there are 150 images in the book, and they're of this kind. I mean, Alex is he's tremendous. So, and for those of you who are involved in study and scholarship, one of the things I'm proudest of is that Chronicle didn't change a word of the 22,000 words of endnotes. And so there's 24 pages of those, which I hope will be a roadmap for future scholarship on Julia Morgan as well. So who was she? Well, she was a native Californian, and I think that was one of the most important things about her. She was born in 1872 in San Francisco. She was the second of 5 children and the eldest girl. Her mother, Eliza, was a very determined woman from whom it seems Julia got much of her spine and focus. Eliza had grown up on the East Coast and went to the Brooklyn Seminary, a very exclusive school, and was very loving, very proud of Julia. But when Julia was on a school trip at Cal, Eliza wrote her a letter, and the stationery on the heading was "Vincit qui patitur," which means he conquers who suffers. And what she said was, I hope you're having a good time. Let a spirit of duty animate you if you're inclined to droop. I don't think Julia Morgan was ever inclined to droop. But anyway, her mother, I think, was a great influence in terms of her work ethic. Her father, Charles Bill Morgan, who was also from the East in Brooklyn Heights area, he had a lot of ambition and he had a lot of determination. And I think she inherited those qualities from him, but not a lot of success. Julia's nephew, Morgan North, who was one of many primary sources that in the Regional Oral History Office, Bancroft Library's 2-volume work of interviews about her life, which was published around 1976. He said of his grandfather, he said he was into nails, machinery, balloons, voting machines, whatever didn't work, he was in. And the fact is that the Morgan family on the West Coast were subsidized a great deal by Eliza Parmalee, as her maiden name, by the Parmalee family, who they lived on Remsen Street. This is Remsen Street, and Julia spent a lot of time actually in Brooklyn Heights, spent almost an entire year there when she was very young, but traveled back and forth. And she was christened actually at Richard Upjohn's great church, Trinity Church. And though 63 Remsen Street, where her grandparents lived, was torn down in 1900 for a hotel. I can't show it to you, but this is 45 Remsen Street, and this is a back window. So we're talking about the 5-story brownstones, with wonderful architectural ornaments. So she grew up around beautiful things, and she grew up in some affluence because of this grandparent subsidization. She went to Oakland High School, which was an outstanding school at the time, graduated in 1890. And here's where she lived in Oakland. It's possible that her grandmother, Eliza's mother, Sarah Parmalee, funded this home because the Morgan family moved into it when Julia was 13. And that was about 5 years after Julia's grandfather Albert Parmalee had died, and Sarah moved from Brooklyn Heights to Oakland. And of course, Oakland was the Brooklyn Heights of San Francisco. So you can see it's not there now. It was at 754 14th, and right now what that is the on-ramp of the 980 freeway. But you, I'm sure, are familiar with Preservation Park, and some of the buildings that are there are actually, taken from this neighborhood. But you get the idea. East Lake stick around the windows, these kind of early signs of Queen Anne, sunbursts, tiling, really a stunning home. And Julia lived in this house for 40 years. She moved in at the age of 13, and she didn't move out until 1925, when she was in her 50s. So she grew up surrounded by beautiful things. And we were able, Ruth is such a great researcher, to discover this line drawing in the San Francisco Examiner long before Julia Morgan knew William Randolph Hearst. This was his paper. It's a line drawing of the Morgan family's living room, and from 1892. And of course, the pride and joy of the living room is this fabulous archway with its ingle nook. The Ingleside seating is to both sides. That was made out of redwood. And then, as you can see, there are red portiere curtains on either side. This kind of arts and crafts aesthetic movement furnishings, kind of a combination. We have that the chairs and bamboo. There's a faux bamboo, very aesthetic movement. There's a polar bear rug right in front of the fireplace. The objet d'art gathered around the mantle. Lots of books, lots of bookcases, and because we had that, we were able to find this. This is Julia's mother, Eliza, in that room. And this is about 1897. Julia had left for Paris the year before. So this is the home that Julia was leaving behind. And as you can see, you can see the built-in books and the objet d'art on the bamboo aesthetic movement stand here. You got a good view of it there. The de rigueur potted plant and bust of Diana, the huntress. Eliza is actually, there were pocket doors in the sitting room, and so Eliza's in the back portion. She's working on a quilt square with the American flag draped over the mirror artfully. And the painting is Christ in Gethsemane by Joseph Hoffman, which is very popular print in the 1890s. So there's photos on the floor, vases of flowers on the floor, everything in such profusion. So she did grow up around beauty. And she went to Cal when this is what it looked like. She was there from 1890 to 1894. And her older brother Parmalee had to escort her on the horse-drawn streetcar. She had thought about medicine. She thought about music. She had a lot of ability in both areas, but decided on architecture. Her second cousin, Lucy Latimer, had married a very prominent architect, Pierre Lebrun, whose major building, the MetLife Tower, is still standing on Madison Avenue in New York City. And they were mentors, the Lebruns, to Julia. They lived in New York, and she corresponded with them extensively. And perhaps that's part of the reason why there wasn't an architecture department. She had to study in civil engineering. And though she wasn't the first woman to do so, she was the first out of the three who actually used her qualifications. Bernard Maybeck arrived on campus just after Julia had graduated. He was an Easterner, grew up in Greenwich Village, and his father was a furniture maker. And he, of course, was a tremendous visionary. And he met Julia not at Cal, where he was going to teach descriptive geometry, but at the Art Institute, what was then called the Mark Hopkins Art Institute. And she was taking classes there, and Ben was teaching them. He later introduced her to Phoebe Apperson Hearst, whom he met at Cal. And she, of course, was William Randolph Hearst's mother. She had been raised in Franklin County, Missouri. It was said with a book in one hand and a butter churn in the other. And this grizzled miner arrived. He'd lived on the neighboring farm, but he'd been gone for more than a decade looking for gold. And actually what he found was silver, Comstock silver, and then later gold and copper. So anyway, when Phoebe was 19, she married this 41-year-old miner, George Hearst, and they sailed for San Francisco. And so she knew that her success had come from education, and she wanted very much to continue the tradition. She had taught herself French. She was teaching even at the age of 18, the young children in the area in Missouri. So after Juliet left for Paris, Phoebe met with Bernard Maybeck, saying that she had wanted to build a mining building, and in memory of her husband, because George Hearst died a senator from California in 1891, leaving Phoebe Hearst and in her 40s with a fortune that is valued in today's money at $540 million, $500 million. So Maybeck said, well, yes, I think a mining building is a wonderful idea, Mrs. Hearst, but don't you think it would be a better idea if you funded a competition and we created a plan and we create the university as the Athens of the West, and then from there we can decide where to site your mining building. And for Ben, being so kind of ethereal as he definitely was, with his handmade clothes and his waistbands that generally stopped right about his armpits, he was brilliant, often derided by his colleagues, called a freak. But he was very, very good at convincing people to do things. And he convinced Phoebe, and she, funded what was the first international architectural competition in history. Because Ben was in charge of the redesign of the Cal campus, he didn't build any structures as a portion of this act, but he did build for Phoebe a sensational building, a fantastical in the true sense of the word building, on the edge of the Oregon border in Mount Shasta, and it was called Wintoon, Wintoon. And it came about because Phoebe had been visiting with one of the regents. She was the first female regent of the University of California, fell in love with the land, asked if she could lease some nearby. And really, how could one say no? They were hoping she wouldn't build anything very large. Well, this was certainly very large, 7 stories with a kind of blue-green tile roof that seemed to just merge into the forest. And as Maybeck wrote to Phoebe when it was finished in 1902, there you can reach all that is within you. He also was the agent for introducing Julia Morgan to Phoebe Apperson Hearst. And he had told Julia that he thought she had the ability to go to Paris and study architecture at the École des Beaux-Arts, which had been founded, the world's finest school for architecture, had been founded in the middle of the 17th century and had never admitted a woman. But there were rumors afoot that women were going to be allowed in the painting and sculpture divisions. Anyway, Maybeck said, dream big. He always said, dream big. And so she went to Paris and joined an atelier, which is what you did to practice for these really arduous exams. So she didn't meet Phoebe Hearst in Berkeley, but Ben and his wife Annie came to Paris to administer the European aspects of the campus competition. And Phoebe arrived on her way to Antwerp, and Julia was introduced to her there. Phoebe instantly wanted to pay for Julia's education, and it was in 1898, and by then she had withstood 2 years of rigors. I'm jumping ahead here, but 2 years of terrible ordeals, of both misogynistic and just creative ordeals to gain admission to the école. And she wanted to pay for Julia's education. And Julia said no. She thanked her and said, your faith in me is enough of a gift. And they did remain close for life. And of course, Phoebe was the one who introduced Julia Morgan to her son, William Randolph Hearst. So it all begins, everything begins with Bernard Maybeck in a sense. So when she arrived, and it hadn't even occurred to anyone that anyone would want to attempt admission to the architecture department. She arrived in the summer of 1896. Women had just been given a foot in the door. It's very tiny, maybe a toe, I would say. And that was that they could audit classes. So this was the Grande Salle des Études, the student area, which Julia would cross every day. And there were giant casts of enormous, classical and Renaissance era statues that she'd have to weave her way around. So she would cross that and audit classes. She joined an atelier to get ready to take these exams, which are legendary for their difficulty. And this is a letter that she wrote to Lucy and Pierre, where she's made a diagram of the first atelier she joined, a young architect named Marcel de Montclos. You see that she's written at the top stores. That means, supplies. And then it says empty just beneath that. And it says Budd, B-U-D-D. That was Catherine Budd, who was another young woman who was, auditing classes, never gained admission to the école. And then it says me, that's Julia. And you see this is a courtyard, but at the staircase you see on the left, that's the salon where the men were that were in this atelier. And the women, young women, had to run the gamut. They had to walk straight through that on the way to their little private cubicles. And Julia said one of the men is very gentlemanly, but the other two could have been exchanged with no difficulty. And there is no doubt that she definitely was hazed. Well, Warren Charles Perry, who later taught at Cal, said, and he had come to the école after Julia, he said she had water poured over her head and was pushed off the ends of benches. But she was indomitable and never, I think, never gave up on anything. But she also gained, while she was attempting to practice, and then after a year there, taking the exam, which she failed the first time, but everybody did. She ended up 43 out of many hundred candidates, so she did well. But they only took a very limited number of foreigners, particularly Americans. And as more Americans started getting accepted, they chopped the number down even further. But she also, besides the perspicacity with which she tackled these projects and exams, she loved Paris. This was her favorite place in Paris, Notre Dame. And what she said she'd love to do the most was go up those narrow stairs and look down on what she called these half-wicked, half-fiend gargoyles. She said, and imagine what they had seen throughout the centuries as Paris had grown and widened from the center of the river, and the city lay down below. So she was definitely aesthetically influenced by just being in Paris. Her younger brother Avery joined her in 1898, and that helped a great deal. And the second time she took the exam, she scored worse. This was in the late 1897, and she was ashamed. She she was kind of afraid to go to her mentor, the architect who ran the Atelier de Monclos. And finally she ran into him and she said, well, what happened? What was wrong? And he made a funny face and he said, the score. And it turned out that the judges, who of course were the faculty members of the école, had artificially lowered her score, which I don't think they would have done if she hadn't done well enough to qualify. They said, we don't want to encourage young girls. And she wrote to Pierre and Lucie saying, well, it's kind of funny and I understand, but I'll take it again just to let them know that the young girls are not discouraged. And actually, she changed ateliers. Like one, de Monclos has kind of crumbled away, and she was the only person reporting there, but she was able to join Francois Benjamin Chauchemiche, and he, like Maybeck, became a dear friend and an important mentor throughout her life. And she really blossomed. And in the fall of 1898, that's when she met Phoebe Hearst. That's when her brother Avery arrived. And that's when she was admitted to the école. She wrote to Pierre and Lucie, it's not much, but has taken quite a little effort. And she talked about it being a sort of test in a small way of work, triumphing over the difficulty. She said it made it seem a thing that really had to be won. Well, it got worldwide press for this young woman to be admitted. And of course, after that, then the work begins, right? Because what you did, you took classes, but to advance through the program, you entered rigorous and constant competitions where you'd be locked in a room for 12 hours and given an assignment. This was to design a theater for a palace. And here's her sketch. After 12 hours, she turned this in. This had been the way that the admission examination process went as well. She turned it in and then went away for 6 weeks and then came back with magnificent drawings in plan, section, and elevation like this. And if in any way these final drawings, which they pushed through the streets of Paris, so they called it en charrette, which is the term that still endures today. If these final drawings deterred in any way, differed from the sketch that you had turned in 6 weeks before, you were disqualified. And there were only 2 winners and you only got 1 or 2 points, and you had to accumulate these points to advance through the program, and you had to have 26 and a further, and you had to finish before you turned 30. Everyone was kicked out of the École des Beaux-Arts at 30. Well, it took Julia that she lost a whole year because of this malfeasance, of the judges. And so she was 27. Many Americans who studied at the École did not graduate. They just came and kind of soaked up the atmosphere. That would include John Galen Howard, who was the ultimate winner of the University of California campus competition. But if they did graduate, it took 6 years. She did it in 3. This was her prize-winning final drawings that got her over the top, literally just days before she turned 30 in 1902. And it really, it caused a worldwide sensation that this young woman would be the first person since the middle of the 17th century to do this. And the sad thing I do want to note, and these are the kind of things that I go into in depth in the endnotes of my book, but is that she's not listed in Jean-Paul Carlien's authoritative volume, Americans in Paris Who Studied at the École des Beaux-Arts, because she didn't get the diplôme, which was the final step. You had to go basically have an internship for a year in an architect's office. And obviously she hadn't been able to do that because of their impediments. So she got the certificat, but it does seem an injustice that she's not even listed as, the full diplôme certificated student. But she came back to a very different Bay Area than she had left because largely of this competition which was underway. And she almost immediately began working for John Galen Howard's office. This was in the fall of 1902. And she was, her first big job was she was the construction superintendent on the Greek Theater. And I don't know who that frock-coated person is in the middle of the speaking area of the stage, but it could be William Randolph Hearst, because it was he who funded this building, the creation of this building, as a way to support his mother's philanthropy. And that may be where Julia and W.R. met. We're really not exactly sure. She didn't design it, but she was the construction superintendent. If they didn't meet there, then they met through the auspices of his mother Phoebe at the Hacienda del Pozo de Verona, the house of the wellhead of Verona, around 1903. Now, this is a building in Pleasanton, which W.R. had asked Phoebe if he could have money to build. In 1894, he wanted a country place. And she said, yes, as long as it's not too large, which is a conspicuous echo of the conversation that had been going on about Wintoun. But nevertheless, when Phoebe arrived, W.R. had been working on this with A.C. Albert Cicero Schweinfurth. And it was this kind of mission revival, but also Pueblo revival house. Anyway, Phoebe was incensed on the inspection tour when she arrived after quite some time and found this 50-room behemoth underway, and she confiscated it. She moved in. W.R. never lived there. This became her major residence until her death in 1919. And sadly, Schweinfurth died very young in 1900 of pneumonia. And when Julia arrived home from Paris, Phoebe hired her to make some considerable additions on the hacienda, which she did on and off between 1903 and 1915. So we're not exactly sure where they met, but when they met, we're pretty sure about that. Julia's just over 30, and W.R. is 40, in his mid 40s. And she was doing a lot of major commissions, even when early on in her return. And one of her largest commissions came quite early, and that was the North Star House. I thought I would highlight some of the things that, kind of broadly speaking, are in the Sacramento region. This is 1904 for the Foots, and it's an immense and baronial hunting lodge, and it's in Grass Valley, and went through a very difficult period, but has been lovingly rehabilitated and is carefully maintained by an ardent group of Julia Morgan enthusiasts. It was all scaffolded when Alex went there, so that's why you're seeing more tree than house. We tried to shoot it during the pandemic, and they were doing some work. But anyway, it really is an interesting early example of what we would probably call the first Bay tradition, kind of like so many Bay Area buildings that she did. And of course, it's using the tailings of the mine. But probably among her early commissions, her best known was El Campanile, the bell tower at Mills College for Women in Oakland. And this too was finished in 1904, steel reinforced concrete, a 72-foot high tower, and remarkable for both its design, which was very advanced for the time, Mission Revival, and also for its sturdiness and stability, because it is steel reinforced concrete, and it did not even crack in mid-April of 1906 when that devastating earthquake hit the city. And it, as you know, was, well, almost 500 blocks were destroyed. Between 500 and 3,000 people were killed. They don't know exactly because of the unknown number of residents in Chinatown. But anyway, a devastating experience. And this brand new building, the Fairmont Hotel, which had been commissioned by the Fair, one of the Fair sisters. It was James Fair. He was a copper magnate. And of course, the Fairmont is what this is. Anyway, it had been commissioned because his daughter said to James Fair, San Francisco doesn't need another big house on Nob Hill. It needs a decent hotel. But it, as you can see, burned. And more than that, its foundations moved 7 feet. And it was just a shell. And many people didn't even think it could be restored. And Julia had studied ferrous concrete. And she talked later about working at night in a job shack, which I think might be one or two of these buildings right in the center of the screen here, where rats jumped over her feet at night until she could get the building stabilized enough so she could move her office inside. And it's just another example of her pertinacity. But the Fairmont, which is, of course, a stunning terracotta tile fronted building, was the first major building to come back from the earthquake. It opened on the 1-year anniversary of the quake, on time and under budget. So really, by 1907, she was extremely well known. She took a partner for a temporary amount of time. She moved her office, and because her first one had blown up. It was on Montgomery after she left John Galen Howard's office. So it exploded when they started setting off the dynamite to try to counteract the fires. But she moved into the Merchants Exchange building. She took a partner in San Francisco, Ira Hoover, for just a couple of years. These are among the houses that they built, these houses on Darby Street, and very typical examples of this First Bay tradition. And of course, many San Franciscans were looking around at the East Bay: better weather, bigger lots, functioning utilities, moving and then not moving back, so she was part of that boom. Now, this is a house that was commissioned by Louise Goddard, who commissioned many buildings from Julia, but it gives you it's a slightly larger than those, but same idea. This is the kind of an interior as far as the First Bay tradition, very arts and crafts, flooded with light. Her one of kind of the seminal aspects of her architectural style was that she was so constantly aware, not only of the plan and building from the inside out, which she'd learned at the AICO, but also of the landscape. And her buildings definitely are an integration of interior and exterior. She did these smaller projects, but she also did bigger commissions. And pretty early, by about 1912, her client in Piedmont gave her this watercolor to look at. It's a Tudor house in Croydon, England. But he asked her, Mr. Lombard asked her if she could build a house that looked like this watercolor. And she did. And I'll go back to the watercolor so that you can see that the gables have moved from right to left, but the oriel window is there, the coining, the contrasting brickwork, the chimneys. This is a 10,000 square foot house, about 1912 in Piedmont. So from the beginning, major commissions of wide range. And that's one of the things about Julia Morgan. There were other women architects, not lots in her era, but certainly several. But they were building women's clubs and kitchen remodels. She built in this incredible range of civic and residential architecture all her life. And one of her major projects was, and Phoebe Hearst was very involved in this, was the YWCA. She ended up being the official architect for the YWCA, including, of course, her magnificent palazzo, the YWCA in Oakland on Webster Street, which she finished in 1913. But beginning in 1913, she started what ended up being more than a dozen buildings at the YWCA's summer compound known as Asilomar, south of Monterey and Pacific Grove. This is the Gray Stodge Chapel, which she worked on in 1915, and here's its interior. And it is one of the largest communities of integrated arts and crafts style buildings in the country. And it was an important social movement. The YWCA provided stability for young women who were leaving their family farms, moving into towns, had no safe place to live, didn't have friends, were trying to, create careers. And every summer they would, spend all year doing hay rides and jumble sales. And then they would have 10 days at Asilomar, where you'll see, this is the Grace Dodge Chapel, named after its donor, but the altar is a window, because of course it has a spectacular view. It's set right on the ocean. Of course, you can still go there today. It's a California State Park and has been beautifully maintained. So she's working on that in the teens. She's working basically from almost the time they met with William Randall First on various projects. She designed a small bungalow for him on the south rim of the Grand Canyon before that portion of land was turned into a national park. That was built. She designed an enormous house for him in Sausalito. That wasn't built because he didn't have the money to build it. But the major project that she worked on with him from 1913 or so to 1915 was the Examiner building in Mission Revival style. Took up the entire city block on 11th and Broadway in Los Angeles, and has just, you probably know, has just gone through a truly spectacular a restoration, and is it's in beautiful condition, and they've opened up these arcades again. And so all she built for WR was a little bungalow, 8 rooms, but he didn't have any doubt that she was going to be capable of tackling an immense project. There was both offices and a factory. There's a newspaper printing plant on the premises. But it's unlikely that he knew the private challenges that she was experiencing at this time. In 1913, her youngest brother, Sam, who was the carefree, happy-go-lucky member of the family, who'd always wanted to be a fireman, was being driven to a fire because he'd become not only a fireman, but a fire captain, and his subordinate turned in front of a streetcar. And both of the young men were horribly injured. Sam was ejected. The top of his scalp was torn off. He was young and strong, and he lingered for 6 months before dying at the age of 33. He lived in the house. They all lived in the house. Even Julia's younger sister, Emma, who married Hart North, moved upstairs, and they lived in the house. So everybody was together, and it must have been a very devastating thing with all the watching and waiting. But those last 3 things I showed you, the Lombard house, the chapel, and also what's now known as the Phoebe Absent-Hearst Social Hall, the first building at Asilomar, and that Examiner building. These were all being done around the time of Sam's accident. So after he died of pneumonia 6 months after the accident, Julia's mother, Eliza, commissioned Julia to design an archway for the King's Daughters Home. Technical name, King's Daughters Home for the Incurables in Oakland, but Julia left that part off the archway. As you can see, she thought those last 3 words were decidedly too pessimistic. All 3 of the Morgan women, Emma, Julia, and Eliza, stayed involved with the King's Daughters Home Hospital. And of course, it's still there today, and so is this archway. So that was her memorial to Sam. So at this time, from about 1912 to 1915, she's also working on residential architecture, really literally all over the state, but a great many structures in the Sacramento region, including Marysville. This is this was the Dunning Rideout house, which Phoebe Abbott Rideout had commissioned Julia to design for Phoebe's own nephew in 1915. And I'm sorry, it's a poor image, but it's a Georgian revival. It's really that same style, the grand stucco style that really came into being after the earthquake, because it was less fire prone. And Julia was a master in this kind of grand stucco style, including also in Marysville, the Hexter house. Now, Phoebe Rideout was one of many who commissioned project after project from Julia, including the Marysville Grammar School, and then after her death, the Marysville Veterans Hall, which sadly was torn down in the 1970s. But here you see the idea of the grand kind of stucco box in a more formal Mediterranean style, the Hexter house. I'm not sure if it was this house or the one I just showed you, but it was likely one of the two, because it was in Marysville that Julia was asked by a client. Mr. Smith was the commissioner of this Hexter house, or Norman Rideout. he told her that it got really cold in Marysville and he didn't like to get up in the get out of bed in the morning. It was too cold. So she created this contraption where he could turn on the heat from underneath his bed covers. And it's such a, I don't know which house, but it would happen in Marysville. It's such a revealing side of the way she approached architecture, which was always to glorify the individual, who, no matter who they were. But while all this was underway, another family tragedy occurred. This was Julia's older brother, Parmalee, and he was just a few years her senior. And like their father, ambitious, but not so good at the follow through. Parmalee died in November of 1918. And we had a terrible time trying to find his death certificate, which Ruth was finally able to do. And I know it's hard to read, but I'll just say on the right in the middle, the surgeon listed the cause of death, and it was cerebrospinal luz, which is another name for syphilis, neurosyphilis, the absolute worst kind of syphilis that is incurable and killed you an inch at a time. And the name on the left-hand side of the person who signed the death certificate was Julia's. And I had wondered, because of the blue books talk about the interviews, and Walter Stahlberg, her employee and longtime friend, said she worked so hard and she'd be gone in Pasadena for a week or more at a time. And I was thinking, doing what? Because the YWCA wasn't built in Pasadena and her commission until 1923. But what she was doing was helping Parmalee die, in spite of the fact that he had a wife and a young daughter and 2 living siblings and both of his parents. And once again, it's extremely typical. And I'm sure this was a traumatic on many levels, but one was the shame that families felt of the fear of social opprobrium. They'd done the Wasserman test. You could tell you had syphilis from 1907, but there was no cure for it until antibiotics in the 1940s. So that is the framework, November of 1918, to consider her work for William Randolph Hearst, because he wrote to her the following spring. Phoebe had died in April of 1919, and he walked into her office, you know, the often told tale probably that Walter Stahlberg would say, and said he was tired of camping and getting old, a little old for tents, and thinking of building something on the hilltop. She said yes without hesitation, even knowing him as a client who was slow to pay, prone to change his mind, et cetera, but she never refused really anybody's commission. That was part of her watchword, but nothing from Hearst. And though they didn't have a romance, they really did have a passion of the mind. She became effectively his architect royal. And it was a remarkable collaboration. He promised her that all she needed to build was a bungalow, and 6 months would do it, you know. But they worked together on San Simeon for 28 years, 1919 to 1947, without it ever being finished. And we do know, thanks to the taxi driver who brought her on the train down from her San Francisco office to see San Simeon for the first time. We know about her first journey up the hill because he, though illiterate, he told his family, and they kept a record of it. She arrived at dawn in San Luis Obispo, 45 miles south, and Steve Zagar in the taxi, this young man, was there with WR, and they started what was then between a 2 and a 3 hour drive to go the 45 miles from San Luis Obispo to San Simeon. They got to literally where the road ended, went through the little town of San Simeon, which of course was the highway back then, and then went up to the old senator's house that WR's dad had built in 1887 and stopped. There were 2 saddled horses there. And you see, it's the middle of nowhere now, and it's immense. It's 110,000 square feet. It's a half a dozen major buildings on the top of the hill, 120 landscape acres of gardens, 165 rooms when you count all the bathrooms, and set into this vast ranch, which even today is 82,000 acres, but at its height in the mid-20s was 250,000 acres. So Julia looks at WR. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. She looks at WR and she says, "I'm 47 and I don't ride." and so he got on the horse and she stayed in the taxi And Steve Zagar gunned the engine, and they called a couple of cowboys over, and they rode alongside and they roped the bumper. That's how she got up the hill the first time. So, you know, she had to build a road. I mean, absolutely everything, the topsoil, all of that. But what I wanted to say by getting back to Sacramento is this client, who was another major one. This is Lizzie Glide, of course, who built not only the Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco, but lovely buildings in Sacramento, which she commissioned from Julia Morgan. These were all going on while San Simeon was underway. It was job 503 of Julia's 700 buildings. And it only got one number for all of that size. So she's not stopping her career. And Lizzie, who had been born in Louisiana, but came to Sacramento just after the Civil War, and then married a Joseph Glide, who became a very wealthy stockman and financier. She commissioned Julia to build her own house in Berkeley. Lizzie moved from Sacramento to Berkeley when her daughters attended Cal. And Julia built for her, I don't have a photo of it, but it's at, in the uplands, the uplands right in the kind of Berkeley Hills area. She built a Tudor style house for Lizzie in 1916. And then she built the Elliott House. That's what this is for her, for Lizzie's daughter, Mary, and her husband, Roy Elliott. And so Lizzie commissioned 3 houses from Julia Morgan and gave each one of her daughters a house. And so here we have Georgian Revival. And then I'm jumping ahead a little bit because this was of the 3, the last one she built, the Selden Williams house, which Julia finished in 1928, very elaborate and lavish in style, and you know, loosely Italianate / Mediterranean Revival, but large, 6,000 square feet, and definitely meant for entertaining. It's on Claremont in Berkeley, and for a while was the vice president's residence, but now it's back in private hands. So you see, it's a box again. We've got a rectangular box, and she's giving them different styles. And so in the middle, sandwiched in the middle, is the Getty House on T Street, now known as the Julia Morgan House. So it has the same stucco box idea, the ample windows, the beautiful symmetry, but in a style that is Mediterranean and veering more toward a kind of florid Spanish decorations right around the upper portion of the balcony there. That's just a small example of what's called churrigueresque, which means silversmith. Platteresque, which means a silversmith-like, you know, very ornately detailed. Anyway, this house was just this house was $24,000, and it was built between 1919 and 1922, precisely when Julia was getting started on San Simeon. And because Mr. Charles Getty donated it to Sacramento State after his death in 1966, and they've done a beautiful job of maintaining it. You can see the interiors, and very typical of her, you walk into a room that a hall, which allows you to access 5 other rooms without going down a long portion of a hallway. And the staircase is a primary focus, and almost always with this gorgeous landing on the window. I mean, sorry, window on the landing is what I meant to say. And all teak, so beautiful finish work and elegant and gracious. So she's doing, she's maintaining this practice. She has between 6 and 8 employees, and she's working during the week on all these commissions at Julia Morgan Architecture Office. Again, I said it was in the Merchants Exchange building, but then she's going down to San Simeon at least 2 times a month, usually. I mean, 568 trips is how many she took, because she logged them. So it's remarkable to think that she, I mean, you know, a day still just had 24 hours in it, and everybody's using a, you know, a T-square and a straight edge, and she's doing all of this incredible work. And then when the Getty House was done, Lizzie Glide commissioned the Sacramento Public Market, which was another thing altogether. It cost $500,000. It was finished in 1923, and this was Lizzie's gift to the commerce of Sacramento, a classical style market, which Julia based on New England precedents, and of course they were based on British precedents. So it's a prototypical kind of covered British market. And it had 24 separate vendors inside, meant to bring a bring revenue to the city of Sacramento. So it was another gift from Lizzie, and also a kind of a scientific rigor to the handling and purchasing of food. And as you know, it has gone through an adaptive reuse. So here is the entrance now to the Sheraton Grand. And I think, you know, it was March Fong Yu's office of the Secretary of State for many years, but it is difficult, I think, a building like this, but not impossible to find a way to, you know, give it an appropriate adaptive reuse. And you can see the garlands, they're also on the sides of the building, and they're all in profusion, fruits and vegetables to celebrate the rich produce of Sacramento. At the same time, in Chico, she's designing for Dr. Moulton this house, which is now owned by the Chico campus and is known as the Warren Reception House. So you see a real affinity, this is 22, 23, with the Getty house that I just showed you, the stucco box, the symmetrical windows, and a freestanding staircase, which was so often a signature of her work. And this feeling of the rooms easily, I mean, brilliant planning. She, you know, she always believed, she said to one of her young employees, he had designed a staircase that was gorgeous, but you had to go up it on your hands and knees. She said, young man, I don't deal with fiction writers. So she always brought not just a practicality to her designs and a beauty and economy, but also a real eye of observation about who each client was and what would best serve their needs. And just to show you, it wasn't always in these Mediterranean styles. Here is the Klein House in Yuba City, which was built just about the same time, and it's stucco, but a modest Tudor revival. I was looking at the one that Bill mentioned this morning at Richmond Park, a very similar, you know, kind of modest residential home, but with lovely details. So that's going on. It's the background reel while she's working on San Simeon. Here, they exchanged 10,000 drawings and well over 2,000 letters, and that has been a rich source of documentation. She's written him asking what he thinks of this plan. He's written her on the side saying, well, I like this idea. It was meant to be like a Mediterranean hill town with the main building, which they called Casa Grande, in the center. But he said, I think that the loggia, these archways on my house, which is the southernmost house, the house of the sea, should be moved to the house in the middle. And so that's what she did. Here's her gouache of what was called Casa del Sol, or usually just the alphabet letter C, Sea House. It was the center of these three cottages, which flanked the front of the main building, like the hillside villages, you know, below the church and the town square. And
Victoria,
all,
just so you know, we're coming close to noon, so we need to.
Oh, thank you. I was going to go 10 more minutes since I started at 12:10. I mean 11:10, but I appreciate the reminder. So anyway, steel reinforced concrete buildings, modern underground utilities. Here's how she worked, and you know, 5 feet tall, and always the only woman on any project. But as one of her employees said, I've seen grown men tremble when she said, no, it won't do. So here you see Casa Grande underway, one of the drawings of the bell towers. And of course, it had electricity. They generated the power hydroelectrically for the first several years of construction, putting all the wiring underground. But she's more than the architect. She's also working with this client who's constantly buying things, and she's having to integrate them into the buildings because he doesn't own them before they start. So it looks like some puzzle that they've put together, but actually, they didn't design around the individual dimensions. They lengthened this ceiling. They heightened that fireplace, the first 11 feet of which are 14th century, but the rest of which is concrete. So it's this very skillful pastiche of designs. The ceiling in the center of this Doge's suite sitting room was owned by Stanford White, who was the kind of prototypical proponent of the period revival. He said, America's the new Rome. We can take the art of Europe and improve on it. So he takes the Flemish painting and flanks it with 18th century medallions 100 years later. She had to flank it with another border because it wasn't the right size for the room. So it's a tremendous amount of piecing together going on. And here you see a drawing in which she and her client appear, I think. I mean, it certainly bears a great resemblance. So she's designing the landscape, working on the interior, designing the zoo, and the estate village, which is still a working village today in the town of San Simeon. Here we have a Mission Revival style warehouse and then other warehouses she built, and the employees' quarters, and Hearst Ranch employees still live in these quarters today, right along what they call old San Simeon Village. We don't know if she knew how to swim, but she knew how to harness water as a magnificent architectural feature in her Roman plunge, which she designed in 1932-33 of gold and glass tile. And then, of course, it's the indoor pool, but not the only one, the Neptune pool, which was named for the figure in the pediment there. Neptune is a 17th century statue. It was heated year round with kerosene fuel oil, and it was lit at night. This is the original lighting restored. So it's astonishing to think that she was doing all of that and this other work, including a magnificent series of swimming pools at UC Berkeley in the Phoebe Hearst Gym, with which she collaborated, on which she collaborated with Bernard Maybeck. It finished in 1927, and I show it to you because right now, sadly, university planners have marked it to be demolished. And so I know you have many causes to fight, but this would be a good one to turn your attentions to as well. We were hoping to save it. She's working for Marion Davies, WR's girlfriend, for more than 30 years, designing swimming pools and a cottage down in Southern California, in Santa Monica. This is, beautiful Georgian style, but it has its Hollywood moments, these elaborate bathrooms. And she's designing in some of her very best work while San Simeon's underway, the Chapel of the Chimes, which is the columbarium in North Oakland, right near Cypress Lawn Cemetery, all done in cast stone. And the Berkeley, what was then known as the Berkeley Women's City Club, which is 6 stories, 48,000 square feet, concrete beams painted to look like an old wooden ceiling. This is designing the book plates, the china, the light fixtures, and the swimming pool, spectacular swimming pool, which is on the ground floor of this 6-story steel reinforced concrete building. So that's all underway. And when Phoebe's wind tune burned to the ground, which it did in 1930, WR commissioned her to build a new one. And this is a small portion of what she designed for him. This Bavarian village, here we're looking at Cinderella House, where you see Cinderella fleeing down that staircase. And the murals by Willie Pogany. This is private. It's still owned by the Hearst Corporation, used by Hearst family members. So not seen by the public, but they do use it in the spring, summer, and early fall as a wonderful retreat. WR and Marion lived here in Brown Bear House. And so these are fairy tales from the Brothers Grimm. So fanciful, Bavarian, and so different from what she'd done elsewhere, but it was too much. She had taken on too much. You see her face distorted here because she'd had a mastoid problem, an infection, and it got worse, and finally her whole inner ear was removed in a botched operation, and she lost her equilibrium, which was a terrible fate for an architect. Yet still she persevered, and WR had bought monasteries, and 2 12th century ones, and wanted to donate one to the Golden Gate Park in the city of San Francisco, and it was going to be built between the Japanese tea garden and the old De Young. Here's Julia's plan for it, but it was never built. The 800-year-old stones were scavenged. Many of them were scattered. Some remain in Golden Gate Park today. Others were near you again. We're winding up here we're back in the Northern California Valley area in Vina near Stockton. Fairly recently, the Abbey of New Clairvaux, Our Lady of New Clairvaux, rebuilt the chapter house, incorporating old stones amid the new ones. But it was a great disappointment to her that her grand medieval museum, a West Coast cloisters, if you will, was never built. Here you see Julia late in life, looking to the left and counting the moments until she doesn't have to be photographed. Sadly, her younger brother Avery and her mother suffered from dementia, and she began experiencing those same symptoms and knew it. So she finally closed down her office in 1950, traveled until she couldn't do that anymore, and died very quietly at the age of 85 in 1957, after some very difficult years where her spirit hadn't diminished, but her physical abilities had. So Hearst Castle opened in 1958, and in 57, when Life magazine did their showy 14-page article lauding it and promising all of its splendors, Julia Morgan's name was never mentioned. incredible to think today, but that's how far into obscurity she had gone. So I hope with this book and with the scholarship, I hope that future students will do, that we've righted the scales a bit, because they certainly should be righted. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much for the presentation.
My pleasure.
I'm going to go ahead and end the screen share, and we will go back to our screens. And we do have time for a few questions. There was one question that came in from where, but I'm not sure what the questioner was referring to. But the chat is open, or if someone wants to speak, you can raise your hand, and I can put you on speaker so you could ask a question. Let's say another question has come in. Okay, gotta thank you, but give people just another minute to ask questions if they have any. My cats are providing editorial comment. All right. Well, not seeing any questions. Sorry we went a little bit over time, but thank you for compensating, and it was very comprehensive and interesting. And thank you. Oh, we actually now we have a bunch of questions coming in. Let's see. Oh, chat is disabled apparently. I'm not sure. Okay, that's odd. But if you don't want to chat, you can either use the Q&A feature to ask questions, or you can raise your hand.
I have a website. But the other
Yes.
thing, I have a website, victoriakastner.com, and you can you can email me there. I've been a little slow since the book came out at getting back to people, but I will respond. And maybe just to wind it up, it's so hard to believe that she could have been so completely ignored. But even in 1966, when Joan Didion, a great Sacramentan, right? When Joan Didion did she did this essay called a Return to Xanadu, and it was about nothing but San Simeon, her childhood memories, her later memories. Julia Morgan's name was never mentioned. And then when finally she came to be known, what people said is, well, she didn't have a style. You know, she would please her client as if that's a bad thing. So it took a long time for people to recognize. And I was on one of the people on the nominating committee who wrote essays to the AIA saying that her gold medal was long overdue. She was the first woman to be awarded it in 2014, first woman and one of the few posthumous candidates. So, but what I would end by saying is there's still so much more to know about this person who is not only an outstanding artist, but a wonderful human being. And I hope I've whetted your appetite and that many of you will investigate further. So thank you so much.
All right. I think that's it. The Q&A has an enormous amount of kudos and thanks, so everyone really appreciated the presentation.
My pleasure.
But I think we'll wrap up. Thanks everyone for attending. Hopefully we'll see many of you at the Preservation Sacramento Historic Home Tour in September, and then as mentioned, I'll be leading the Solar Punk Tour in October for the AIACV Experience Architecture, and be on the lookout for Victoria's book. Thanks everyone, and have a pleasant day.